Recently, video game consoles have not had the most amazing launch window titles, and to me, that feels like it started with the Xbox 360. So, when I decided I was finally going to play Full Auto, I came into it fully expecting it to not be great. It didn't review well at release, and launch window games of the 360 generation and later have generally not aged really well. Even ones I still like today, like Condemned, have aged dramatically worse than the biggest launch games for the N64 or the PS1 have. Still, despite the fact I had never really played the full release of Full Auto until now, I do have vivid memories of playing it, or at least seeing a video of it, on a demo kiosk prior to the Xbox 360's launch, right alongside Call of Duty 2. Yet while I grabbed a copy of COD 2 as soon as I got my hands on a 360, I never really had any desire to pick up Full Auto. Between the middling reviews and the fact that no one I knew had played it, it has remained a blind spot for me in the 360's launch lineup. Full Auto's basic concept is pretty simple to wrap your head around. What if you made an arcade racing game, but then those cars had guns strapped to them? Generally, you get one or the other out of those two things. Car combat games like Twisted Metal generally didn't lean very hard into traditional racing. They'd usually choose to set themselves in these huge arenas that would often be set in cities or even just giant stadiums where you'd have to go find and hunt down your enemies, kind of demolition derby style. Meanwhile, the vast majority of games that have you racing from one point to another alongside a set route don't really give you guns the entire time. The games that do give you some sort of weaponry, things like Wipeout or even the venerable Mario Kart, handle theirs as temporary power-ups, not consistent fixtures to your car, something that makes Full Auto somewhat unique in the space. And to be completely honest, I had a lot more fun playing Full Auto than I thought I would. The racing is chaotic in a pretty entertaining way, and the guns, while not always particularly useful, do sometimes give you more options for passing cars that are stuck annoyingly right in front of you, or cars that are tailing you really close. If nothing else, they add another element of chaos to the mix, making for a really delightfully wild environment, not that dissimilar to what made the Burnout games so great. But, as I expected, there are also plenty of problems here. Full Auto was from an era where physics were still pretty novel, and there are all sorts of places and tracks where the wonky physics can absolutely screw you over. Sometimes you'll get wedged into a space and be unable to get out, or shoot off at a weird angle. Once I even got catapulted beyond the track barriers and stuck outside them, with no recourse but to restart the race entirely. Thankfully, the game does give you a decent bit of leeway with its rewind functionality, which it's branded as Unwreck, and it gets you out of most jams as long as you realize you're in one fast enough. If you don't manage to react quickly enough, though, you'll be restarting the race to try again. In addition, the frame rate is all over the place, and the only time it's actually really smooth is when you manage to get in an alley by yourself with no other cars. At pretty much any other point, it's kind of stuttering and chugging throughout each and every race. Despite all that, though, I ultimately think the biggest reason this game was panned on release is because of the fact it came out at a time when there were so many other way better arcade racing games to choose from. For sure, if you haven't played this game's contemporaries, you should absolutely play those first. Other arcade racers coming out at the same time, like Burnout Revenge and Need for Speed Most Wanted, are way better games without a doubt. But in today's world, where the release of any arcade racing game happens so seldomly, much less games where you can hope to classify them as good or fun. And so now, Full Auto, for all its frame rate issues and physics wonkiness, and just general bugginess, still manages to feel like a breath of fresh air. Most of the time, I don't really think the weapons add much of any real value, however. As mentioned earlier, they can come in handy occasionally to deal with cars immediately in front of or behind you, but the use case is so infrequent that they end up feeling pretty close to the power-ups of a Wipeout game. Their biggest issue, however, is how they control. In the best case scenario, they just require you to hit a button at the right time to do damage to opponents in front of or behind you. They use some sort of a lock-on, or they just drop something behind your car, kind of like you'd expect from other, kind of arcade games that have weaponry. In the worst case, however, the weapons require aiming, which is way too often just one too many things to be juggling in a racing game, and results in you losing attention to some other element of gameplay while you try to train a shotgun on the guy in front of you, making you hit a wall or another car, or leaving you vulnerable to somebody else. More often than not, this means that I found the rear weapons far more useful than the forward-facing ones. I also wish there were more in the way of actual races. There are only really 3 series of races, each of which takes a little over an hour to complete. So by the time I was all said and done with what the game had for me in terms of career mode races, it was only about 3.5 hours. There are more events, but they start to get into weird things that involve hunting specific cars or causing a certain amount of damage or other things like that I kind of classify as side modes, and stuff that you start to say, well, other games are doing this sort of thing a lot better. Still, I had enough fun with Full Auto for long enough that I think I can give it a very solid recommendation, especially given its current price on the used market. Right now, as of this video, you can pick up a copy on eBay here in the US, including shipping, for a total price of about $10. Well worth it in a world that is so lacking in fun arcade racers, even if you are just going to get 3.5 hours out of it. And that's the best way to sum up my time with the game. Very simply, most of the time I was playing Full Auto, I was just having a whole lot of fun. And the current landscape for arcade racers is one in which that's weirdly refreshing.